Friday Night Racing
on Off the Ball.
Brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie.
Yes, indeed. You're very welcome along to Friday Night Racing this week. It's live every Friday afternoon, of course, on all of our social channels, and then repeated every Friday evening on Off the Ball on News Talk. Brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie or follow the new Twitter account at HRI Racing, and the hashtag is Every Racing Moment. Our guest this week is Dr. Jennifer Pugh, who's the Senior Medical Officer of the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board. Jennifer, you're very welcome. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And also with us as ever is Johnny Ward, who's dressed up for formal Friday, or else you're just like this every Friday at home, Johnny, and we're casually catching you, discovering you like this.
Yeah, I do this every Friday, Jerry. You know me, but it's as formal as I can get. I've gone for the kind of grizzled hack look. Do you remember the days where hacks look like this? Or they certainly do in The Simpsons, anyway.
Yeah, you'd have the word press attached to the hat. What is the name of the hat?
What is the name of the hat for you? Lorenzo.
Oh, the hat has an identity. I actually thought I meant the type.
You can
of
buy
hat.
this hat. Buy this hat.
Your sales pitch went down there on the back of a dodgy Skype line. Give it to us again when the line comes back. You can buy Lorenzo.
This hat is called Lorenzo. You can buy Lorenzo for how much? Negotiable, yeah. Looks like business. Hats aren't selling very well at the moment, you know, what with the coronavirus, but if this won't sell Lorenzo, I don't know what will.
Okay, great. It looks like you got a whiskey sour delivered to you there as well. So things are going quite well for you, Johnny, this afternoon. Dr. Jennifer Pugh, you're very welcome. Apologies for the piratical takeover that we've just had from Johnny there. First off,
somewhat impressed. I wish I'd got the dress code.
Talk to us a little bit about what the actual gig entails as the Senior Medical Officer for the IHRB. What is your job?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it concise because it's a very multifaceted role that's quite difficult to, I suppose, give it a one-liner. But essentially, it's the care of the jockeys, the licensed jockeys with us. And that entails their management when they're injured, all of the safety aspects in terms of helmet, back protector, safety aspects on the race course, looking after them when they're injured, making sure they're with the right people, the right specialists, getting the right care, trying to persuade them to take time to recover and to recover properly and get some form of rehabilitation afterwards. And then there are broader aspects like the jockey welfare. So we do a lot of work on their nutritional side and on their facilities on race day, trying to keep things as healthy as possible for them in order to make sure that they get the greatest longevity out of their career. So I'd be involved with the jockey pathway. And I know you've had several of those members on here before. So we have the sports and conditioning team, physiotherapy, psychology. You had Ciara Losty on last week. And Gilly O'Loughlin's been on the show before with him from the nutritional side of things. So I get to input and assist them where possible in terms of making things as good and as healthy as we can for the jockeys in the career that they have. And then we have a research team as well, which I'm lucky that I get to piggyback onto. And again, you've had several of our PhD students and research people on talking before with all the different things we do. It's like anything, particularly anything that's in the world of medicine, it has to be evidence-based. So, you know, we put a lot into making sure that the decisions we make have plenty of backup. So, yeah, lots of things. I find myself in all kinds of meetings that dealing with all kinds of things that I never thought I would have to, and being an expert or a so-called advisor on many things. But it's never dull. That's for sure.
And before coronavirus shut everything down, what would you have said the biggest challenges for your role were in terms of jockey health? What would kind of be the main areas of focus that actually end up taking up most of your time?
It's actually quite difficult to pick one thing out because, you know, it's been brought up time and time again in this programme about the challenges of the jockeys and the lifestyle they lead. One of the biggest things really is the culture. And I think with this before, that jockeys don't necessarily see themselves as athletes, and that can be difficult because they have to be horsemen and they have to do a day's work in and around trying to be an athlete, and it's very, very different to most other professional sports people and the hours that they work and the maintaining weight and then the subsequent mental health issues that we see with that. So there's not just one thing, because every single thing that I've mentioned there has a knock-on effect to the next problem or the next issue that a jockey might have, and how they cope with that and how they deal with that. So, but I think if we can get a shift in the jockeys, and it is starting to come slowly, whereas they're buying into rehabilitation, they're buying into psychology, they go to see the physiotherapist more often, but it's a lot of spoon feeding, you know, and a lot of really trying to get the mindset changed, that they do look after themselves and do treat themselves properly.
We were talking a good bit about this actually last week in terms of how the mindset that creates the super competitive person who becomes an elite jockey, a lot of that is artifice. A fair bit of it, I would argue, is faking it till you make it in some aspects, but then it's also an ability to break through pain barriers that the rest of us don't have, or to be super concentrated on one aspect of a particular skill that gives you an advantage over other people. And these aren't necessarily the traits of a character that allow you to be very open-minded when it comes to somebody giving you advice or seeking help and showing signs of weakness. It's almost as if you were to try and build the perfect person who was anti-help from outside, you would pick an elite sports person, and you might pick an elite sports person who puts their life on the line every time they get on a horse, and then you might pick a jockey who is super competitive to the point where they were best friends with these people, but equally trying to slit their throats on an almost hourly basis or every 45 minutes.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head with a lot of points there. If you were to pick the absolute ideal jockey, would be obviously a natural lightweight, a hugely strong sense of competitiveness, that never lie down attitude, somebody with massive pain threshold, someone who will come back from injury quickly, but also somebody with a lot of natural talent, because, you know, hard work will take you so far, but most of our successful jockeys have a very unique, very natural talent to their sport. And then you need someone who has a support team around them that can nurture this and look after this. And that's probably where we don't tend to do so well often. So, you know, you need a team of people around you, people who will look after you as you ride out your claim and beyond that. So there's very few jockeys that will have all of that. So they're usually fighting one demon or another to try and compensate, to try and get the perfect package. And again, you know, a lot of it comes from just bad luck, where people get a run of injuries, and we've seen very talented jockeys who just never get over that run of injuries. Or we see people who've success maybe at an age when they haven't got the supports around them or the maturity to deal with that, and they get carried off on the success and all of the grandeur that brings with it. So yeah, it takes a very unique person and unique jockey with a very special mindset to absolutely make it to the top, along with having a very unique talent.
What was it like replacing Dr. Adrian McGoldrick as well? And, you know, what sort of, I suppose, foundation for the house was there after all the work that he'd done? I suppose he's gone down in racing history, even in Ireland, I think, has been hugely influential in terms of just not only, I suppose, how good he was at his job and how he was a bit of a 24/7 operator, but also the fact that he probably was influential in that revolution in terms of the change of the mindset.
Absolutely, and I'm certainly, you know, incredibly lucky to have been taken over a job that was left in such a nice and healthy position, which it was. Adrian's very unique in many ways. I think certainly his work ethic is like one I've never seen before, but it's daunting taking over from someone like him. Certainly everybody who would have congratulated me, oh, well done in getting the job, you've got big boots to fill. So I think everybody kind of followed up with that comment. Adrian certainly fought incredibly hard for the jockeys and continues to do that. And, you know, we're in a very lucky position. I've known Adrian for quite some time, and I get on exceptionally well for him. I count him as a friend, but in particular as a mentor. And he's still heavily involved, certainly in keeping me on track and on keeping the jockeys. And a lot of the jockeys have become, you know, Adrian is their GP and they will still go to him, but we have a really good working relationship with that, and there's a lot of transparency there. So, and in general, Adrian and I would be on the same page for most decisions and most things that we do. We tend to be in the same wavelength, but definitely big boots to fill, and he will go down in racing folklore, and with very good reason.
In terms of your own background as well, having been ex-lady champion point-to-point rider, it probably helps in that I think racing people, they definitely appreciate their own. And did it help the fact that you were kind of going in there as one of their own?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a prerequisite for this job, but it's definitely a help to have a racing background and a racing knowledge, because there's so many nuances in this sport that people from the outside just would find it more difficult to get. It was quite funny that when I first started as racecourse medical officer and I was in the weigh room checking out riders, and a couple of them said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, well, I'm working." And, "Well, so what do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a doctor." So they would have seen me riding and not ever realised that I had a job outside of that, and maybe didn't quite believe that I was who I said it was. But obviously, you know, they've gotten used to me now. I think certainly I've grown up in racing, so I have that. Certainly all of my friends, all of my family, they all make their living in some way or another in the racing industry, so it gives me a huge perspective on that. You know, I rode as an amateur very much as a hobby. I was studying or working at the same time. So I did it in between when I could. My sister rode a lot, so I kind of swung off her tailcoats a little bit and followed her around, took the spur rides that she didn't want. And probably the fact that she was doing it so much more and so much more successfully gave me certainly a bit of a help in where I ended up. And I got in a good run, and I had a few winners. But, I had a few falls. I had a lot of injuries. I sneaked past the doctor on numerous occasions to not let them know I had a broken bone. Sneaked my sister past the doctor many times with concussion that we tried to hide and disguise. So I kind of know a lot of the tricks of the trade. And thankfully, we're kind of getting to that stage where that happens less. The jockeys tend to know now, actually, if you're injured, it's better to tell the doctor, not to try and sneak past them, which you might have done bad.
Well, have you seen, say, since you were 2003, you kind of got involved in the point-to-point scene in terms of the medical side. What have you seen difference-wise in the 16 intervening years in terms of the nature of injuries or the general, I suppose, what are have the jockeys in terms of their own physical makeup, have they changed a little in those 16 years, and are their injuries different now, or are they the same?
So the injuries themselves probably haven't changed a lot. We have seen overall a downward trend in injury rates over the course of the last 10 years or so, albeit quite minimal. But the injuries themselves tend to be very similar. We have lots of clavicles, collarbones, we have lots of soft tissue injuries, lots of ribs, and thankfully the more serious injuries remain quite low. And a lot of that's down to the new designs in helmet, new designs in back protector. Certainly in point-to-points, I put a lot of it down to a lot more standardisation of how the race course is put together. It's set up a pop-up track for a day. And I think huge credit to the clerks of the courses and the hunt clubs who produce safe ground, who make sure the track's laid out properly. There's a lot of consistency with the fences, which has improved the jumping, and the quality of horse and the preparation of horses going into point-to-points in particularly is of a much higher standard now. So very few people use it as a schooling ground. It's now they come race ready and race fit. And I think that's probably contributed most to the safety aspect in point-to-pointing.
Can we go back to the bit where you were a jockey sneaking through concussions? Because I think this is it's obviously a massive issue in every sport, and having somebody on your side of the fence now who has been on the other side, it's poacher turned gamekeeper in many ways. Why were you doing that at the time, and what have you learned about communicating the fact that you've been on this side to people and going, look, I'm going to have to tell you to stand down, or I'm going to have to get the message out there for people to stand down when they are concussed?
I think, again, we can go back to Adrian McGoldrick on this one, because he did absolutely massive work on the concussion protocol. So previously, back when I was starting to ride, it was it could be up to a mandatory 21-20 a dead stand down with a concussion, which nobody wanted to face into. So at all costs, if you were conscious at all, you tried to get away with it. But I think the new concussion protocol allows jockeys back within 7 days if it's very minor. It's a very robust system now. And the jockeys have learned to trust that. And Adrian has done massive work, and the team, to get the education out there. And it's kind of coincided with the time when internationally the research on concussion has been so significant and the advances made. So it's now no longer a kind of an unknown subject. We know lots about concussion now, and it's across all sports. The rugby, football, the American sports have done massive PR work on this. So it's made our job a lot easier now, and I would certainly say now, even for some of the borderline cases, because you can have a very minor concussion and immediately afterwards someone appears and seems absolutely normal. But I've even seen now where the jockeys might come back after half an hour and say, I'm just not quite right, whereas before they would never have volunteered that information. So I think it's a lot about trust. They know that we're making the call for the right reason, and they're starting to look after their heads. They're changing helmets regularly. So the whole ethos around it has completely changed, and our understanding of it has. But like I say, back 20 years ago, if you were looking at 3-4 weeks off, it was devastating for a jockey at that time, and there was no way to overcome that. Once you were deemed concussed on the track, full stop, you were gone. Yeah,
so it's a culture shift. And you're talking about a culture shift as well with all of the other stuff. How close are you to getting to a point where it's not spoon feeding and it's actually an entirely, they see you guys as help for them to be better professionals?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, we are definitely getting there, even with the senior riders. What can be a help, or what is a help now with the new licensing course, so all new apprentices and conditional jockeys taking out their license do a course, a 2-day course, and they get an early introduction. So the physio, they get a physiotherapy assessment with John Butler, our physio. The dietitian Gilly O'Loughlin speaks to them. The sports and condition team, Wayne Middleton, speaks to them. Ciara Losty, who you had in last week, speaks to them. So they have an introduction on that very initial stage. And I think then what will be rolled out from that is annually like a CPD, a continued professional development for apprentices, whereby they will have to engage with each of the each of the pathway experts at least once or twice every year. So it becomes normal, it becomes something you do, whether you have problems or not. You see the psychologist once or twice a year. Whether you have difficulty or not, you get your weight assessed with the dietitian. So it's that input at a really early stage where hopefully the current generation of apprentices will just, it'll be a normal, natural thing to look for help, accept that help, and realise how much better you can do from that.
On the concussion issue, Jennifer, do you think that we've gotten to the top of it across sports in terms of how to deal with it when it happens, but also sort of long term? Because I would still be I'd be concerned that in some field sports, particularly maybe rugby, that there's still maybe not quite taking it seriously enough in terms of the potential long-term ramifications. And that's what my main concern would be. Like, do we know enough about the dangers of concussion, repeated concussion, in terms of your long-term potential negativities?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think the main thing about what you said there is that there's still so much unknown about concussion. I've had a talk recently with Dr. Michael Turner, who's a former BHA medical advisor, and he's a fabulous man doing fabulous research on concussion. But overall, concussion was only given it a name or an actual diagnosis 18 years ago. So in the whole grand scheme of the world of medicine, 18 years is a really short period of time, and really most of that research has been done in the last 10 years. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in a lot of sports. There's continuous improvements needed in our sport. I think the most important thing is vigilance and education. We certainly, as a group of doctors on the course, have become much more acclimatized and much better at picking up the concussions, particularly the subtle ones. But we're used to doing it. We're seeing it every day, and we know our population. Whereas if you're a doctor for the day at the sideline pitch on an underage match somewhere, you don't have that luxury of knowing the people that you're working with. You may not have a team around you who are particularly interested in this, and that's the problem in a lot of sports, particularly at that professional level. And if you move it up a step from the underage games and you go to a competitive match where you cannot afford to lose that one member of a team, so there's massive pressures on there. But still tons of work to be done. And in fact, the concussion conference was due for Paris in October of this year, where we did expect a lot of changes to come from that, and unfortunately it's been cancelled for 12 months due to the travel restrictions that we expect to still be in place. But there will be changes, including for our sport, no question.
It's interesting you say that as well, because we all have this image of the player on the sideline who's absolute, it's 70 minutes into the game or whatever, he's the MVP, he needs to get back on the pitch, the coach wants him back on the pitch, and you almost have this image of the coach and the doctor kind of having a fight over what's the right thing to do. But is it black and white in racing, like that's it, you're not riding in the next race?
Yeah, fairly at this stage, yes. Again, I think there are individual cases, and certainly a few years ago it might have been a problem. Particularly the trainer might be knocking the medical room door, looking ex-jockey to be weighed out for the next race. But again, I think racing people, in fairness, they're very receptive and they're very aware of the need to look after the jockeys. And really, there's very little kickback from anybody, trainers or owners. If we say there's a concussion and they're out, they're very accepting of that. Which we're lucky. We're lucky we don't have that standoff between a team coach like some sports.
It is a different relationship, though, obviously, because the jockeys are essentially all sole traders. They're the ones who will make the decision whether or not they're going to go and race, and it can be as black and white as I'll be able to make my mortgage payment this week if I ride in that next race, but if I don't, I won't be able to.
Yeah, and I think again we're kind of lucky in many ways that all of the doctors that we have working on the racecourse as medical officers are all racing people, and again, it's not a prerequisite for the job, but having an understanding of that and an understanding, particularly where they might be financially and why they have that drive to come back, to either not get stood down or to get back as quickly as possible. And so, while it is some things that are very black and white, there are other cases where we might just say, look, just finish up for today and we'll reassess it tomorrow, particularly in the middle of a 2 or 3 day festival when they really want to get back and you're going. But I would say, in fairness to the jockeys, they work really well with us. The days of them having a tantrum or stomping out or having any kind of a dissent is really gone. I think there's really good relationships with all of the doctors, and I know we're on their side. They know we're not there to catch them out. We're not trying to, there's no one there trying to do them any harm, only after. And, and Adrian definitely was again behind that kind of shift in the relationship between the doctors and the jockeys, of making sure that they knew, we're on your side and our aim is to keep you racing as healthy and safely as possible for as long as possible.
Can we change tack here and talk a little bit about what it was like when the racing was continuing behind closed doors? What was your experience of that, and how easy or otherwise was it to put the medical care that's required in place?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite surreal to think that's well over 4 weeks at this stage. And there were, 10 race meetings that were held behind closed doors. So very unique experience and certainly a very steep learning curve for everybody. Certainly from the first meeting that Friday night in Dundalk up until when we finished up in Clonmel. And I think everyone who was there would have seen, it obviously took us a couple of meetings to get on top of everything and to get everything right. And things changed rapidly. I mean, there was constant changes in protocols and procedures and what we were trying to do from meeting to meeting, and things changed quite rapidly. I would say, though, again, to commend everybody who was involved, both from the IHRB staff point of view, but also the participants, that we got massive buy-in. And I think really early on, jockeys, trainers, stable staff, everyone grasped the gravity of this and what we needed to do. And that made it much, much easier to implement what we were trying to do.
Yeah, and in a way, you've got a prototype, or at least an architecture and a system and a matrix in place for what happens when, inevitably, whenever sport comes back, whatever sport does come back is going to be behind closed doors at the start. So were there specific learnings that you think might even be applicable to other sports from that 10 very short, small sample size, granted, but like, as you said, obviously it had to hothouse the ideas pretty quickly. So were there lessons for other sports as well?
Absolutely. I think, definitely the 10 meetings has left us in a good position in terms of what we need to work on in order to get back again. And certainly every sport in the country, in the same way as every industry, every business, are spending this time trying to work out how we do get back, when restrictions start to relax at whatever degree that might be, how we can do this safely. So to have had the 10 days under our belt is hugely important for us. And we take what went well and what didn't go so well, and we can expand that, and that work is ongoing at the moment with everybody in HRI and HRB to get things absolutely spot on to make sure that everybody's safe if and when we can come back. In terms of other sports, I mean, we are in a quite unique position in that, first of all, we're outdoors, but we're outdoors in a vast space, so it's even different to a stadium. We've got acres of site on a racecourse, and we've loads of buildings that we can use, because when you take out the general public and the bookmakers and the bars and the restaurants, there are loads of different areas that we can use to make sure that we can do social distancing, whereas other sports, once you have your players and that in the pitch, there's no room for anyone else after that. Also, we're not a team sport. We don't need to train the way teams need to train. So if you bring a professional football or rugby team, whatever training they've been doing at home, they're not going to be pitch ready, so that or match ready. So we have an advantage that we don't need to do that, and we're not a contact sport as well. So there's massive advantages to us. But certainly we have a nice bit of collaboration with other sports and with other racing jurisdictions in other countries, and with sports in this, to make sure that we're all on the same page when we do come back.
I think you've made a very interesting point there as well about the readiness, because as I've sort of been pushing for, if necessary, League of Ireland returning briefly behind closed doors, and I was thinking about this last night, if you're putting the game behind closed doors, the quality of the game absolutely has to suffer because of the inability of the players to train for so long. And like another aspect to racing, I think racing has an advantage. You mentioned the fact that we had those 10 days. Can you explain how this works in terms of ambulances? Because we have the Order of Malta as a voluntary service, and this was key, wasn't it? The fact that the Order of Malta wasn't needed on the front line, so racing was happy to go ahead as long as we were sort of the Order of Malta could continue its day job at the racecourse and its voluntary service.
Yeah, so the Order of Malta are the ambulance provider. For the majority of our tracks, we have the Irish Red Cross and the Civil Defence at a couple of 20 tracks are serviced by the Order of Malta. So they are a voluntary organisation who have a fleet of ambulances across the country, and they do most of our work. So they also do lots of other community events, 5K runs, football matches. They're across a lot of different sports. And up until the time that we raced, they were still on standby for the HSE, or the National Ambulance Service at that time. And so we're more than able and willing and happy to continue servicing the race meetings. And in the intervening time, they have since been called up to varying degrees, depending on their location. So some of the units have been helping out at the testing centres, distributing the swabs. Some of the teams have done a lot of community work in terms of delivering food and medicines and packages to people who are cocooning. And they've done a lot of kind of non-urgent national ambulance transport of non-COVID patients as well as COVID patients. So they've been called up to varying degrees. But as it happened, I had a phone call with their senior management team last night, and they are already beginning to be kind of stood back down again as thankfully things haven't gotten to quite the numbers that might have been anticipated at the start of all this. So they are from racing point of view, are ready to go at whatever point we're ready to go when government restrictions lift to whatever degree that happens or when that happens. They have a massive fleet of ambulances, they have a massive fleet of volunteers, and we're very lucky in racing that we have the use of the Order of Malta and all their expertise, and particularly locally, they know the racetracks, they know the people, they know the hospital setup, and they're an absolute diamond organisation. The pressure, it's a pleasure to work for them every single day we go racing. But that certainly made it possible for us to continue racing up to the 10 days. And when we do come back, it's really important to stress that at no point have we ever been draining other medical resources that might ever, have been needed for the COVID response from the HSE.
And I think it's important the point you make there, that because racing was seen as something of an outlier because it had gone ahead. But from your perspective, you're not coming from this from a racing perspective. You're coming from this from a dual perspective of knowing what's necessary in terms of the medical crisis at the moment. But from your perspective, racing behind closed doors worked well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think we can certainly stand over the social distancing side of things at the racecourse. And when we go back, we absolutely will, because we've had time to sit down and think about that and tweak things, whereas we were kind of very much making decisions each day before racing. But in terms of social distancing, you need it's the smallest number of people for the shortest period of time at any given track. And, what we asked of people and what we asked of the jockeys kind of goes against most of what I'm normally vying for. I'm normally looking for the best facilities, the best nutrition, all of that. But on a race day, there's no access to the weigh room. The jockeys are in and out, that minimal contact to get your saddle weigh out and leave again. We had a one-way system going for weighing back in again. There were no showers, no saunas, no areas where anybody could congregate. And we opened up vast areas within the stands if jockeys needed somewhere to change, where they would go into and be able to keep, meters apart from their colleagues, never mind 2 meters. And a lot of them used their cars in between racing. And the same for the trainers. They came to the door of the weigh room, they were handed out the saddle, and they went off again in the stable yard to see that everyone, and we have markers all over the track and the stable yard as well to make sure that people were staying apart. And we tweaked a lot of our procedures in the veterinary unit as well to make sure that any contact with any person would be minimal. And that's what allowed us to keep going for the 10 days, along with the fact that we had available ambulance services and we had available doctors to service things. I do think when we stopped, it was the right time to stop. It was at that point in that horrid graph that we were on that upslope, and I think we stopped when we needed to. And as to when we get back, that would be out of our hands. It's up to government at this stage.
Yeah, it's just that. I think a lot of people would have had those concerns. Certainly when people are talking about Premier League matches coming back and the amount of medical staff that would be required for all those games if they were happening simultaneously, there was the concern about some drain on the NHS resources. But I think the point about the Order of Malta is well made, and you kind of answered that query that people would have. In terms of the geographical spread of when certain units of the Order of Malta have been called up or being stepped down, would that dictate perhaps that racing might come back in certain areas of the country quicker than in other areas, or actually would that be largely irrelevant in terms of if the government makes the decision that it can come back, then most tracks would actually, on the basis of the 10 days that you've had, be able to facilitate successful and safe racing?
Yeah, from an ambulance point of view, the Order of Malta, and they do this anyway on numerous occasions, depending on their availability, that a unit from a different part of the country would travel down to cover another meeting. So they have given us that commitment that won't be a problem. They have volunteers and they have enough ambulances. And if it means bringing one from a different geographical area, that won't be an issue. The Order of Malta are a volunteer organisation as well, and obviously no one can fundraise at the moment. There are no events on for any income, so our work for them is vitally important as well to keep them, to keep them on the road. And like I said, we're extremely lucky to have them and to have their level of commitment.
A reminder, Friday Night Racing is brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. It streams live every Friday afternoon on all of our social channels at 3 o'clock on YouTube. The best place to get it is offtheball.com. And then, of course, every Friday night it is on the radio as well. Our guest this week is Dr. Jennifer Pugh, the Senior Medical Officer of the Irish Horse Racing Regulatory Board. Your day job, though, I guess at the moment is obviously working with the crisis. How did that work out for you? So you very, very busy with trying to make sure that all the protocols are in place for racing stops. What happened next for you?
Yeah, certainly there was a shift when racing finished from the kind of not the mayhem, but the busyness of making sure racing was able to continue and that the right decisions were being made. And then once that stopped, what do we do? Where am I needed? And I think most doctors in the country who ended up finding themselves in non-essential roles were quick to and more than happy to sign up to whatever or wherever they were needed. So a colleague of mine, actually another racecourse doctor, Dr. Ciara O'Carroll, had been moved from her role in GP into a GP-led clinic in the Mater emergency department, and they were looking for another GP. So I've been in there a few days a week along with Ciara. So I suppose the one thing that's really overwhelming when you do go into a hospital setting is to see just how well prepared they've been. I wouldn't have had much experience in the Mater Hospital. I never worked there before, but it's been absolutely phenomenal to see just how prepared they have been and how prepared they are, and that this plan has been going on for months and months, right from January in the Mater and hospitals across the country. So yeah, it's been challenging, no question. You're particularly to be back in a hospital setting and to be dealing with an illness. Has been fabulous among the medics.
He just froze out there at the last bit. Can I ask you what it's actually like on the front line? Because today, obviously, we're dressed up for Formal Friday. We're trying to raise money for various frontline charities. If people want to donate, it's offtheball.com/donate. But what is it actually like for you guys in the hospital? What are you seeing, and what has the experience been like so far?
So I suppose I'm well protected in that I'm in a GP-led clinic beside the emergency department, so I'm somewhat well sheltered there. So I won't blow up what I'm doing. But I think certainly when you go into the hospital, it's right across the board. I think morale still remains high. And you look at the people who are there, and it's not just the doctors and the nurses, it's the care assistants, it's the cleaners, the security staff, the administrative staff. We're all getting up every day and going into their work into a high-risk environment. Certainly on the wards where the infected patients are being looked after in the ICU, it's incredibly challenging. We've all seen the pictures of the PPE and needing to wear that. Certainly when I'm assessing or examining a patient, I put it on, and thankfully it's only really for a couple of hours at a time, but it is incredibly claustrophobic, incredibly difficult to wear, and a whole different sense of interacting with your patient when you're under a visor and a mask. But certainly, even I would say the general public have become very receptive to that. They know the purpose of it is to protect us, to protect ourselves, and to protect the patient. But certainly, in a hospital, everything is completely different to what it would have been. Every team is different. Doctors have really had to move out of their comfort zone, as have nurses, and work in departments and in areas that they maybe wouldn't have been normally working in. But they have absolutely stepped up to the mark and really blown this out of the park. To be honest, it's fabulous to see it in motion.
Yeah, when you talk about morale, I think when you start to see the impact and the talk about the curve being flattened. The other side of that, though, is that people become a little bit complacent, and we've certainly seen an increase in people on the streets. We've seen an increase in people travelling a bit and maybe making some non-essential journeys. As a medic, is this something that you'd be concerned about at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think we absolutely have to stand by what we've been asked to do. This kind of sense that things have gone well for us, that we haven't hit the levels that we've seen in other European countries, and that's really only because we have absolutely done what we've been asked to do. And as a society and a population, we have to be commended. And I think everyone has really played their role in that. But as has always been the fear of when do you introduce lockdown, when, how long can people do it for? And certainly as the news gets a little bit better in terms of the transmission rate, there's no doubt there's complacency settling in. And you think, oh, well, I'll just pop down to see my neighbour, or my kids might just play together, or I might just pop over to see my grandmother or whatever. And certainly, there is data come out in the last few days in terms of the Google and the Apple information that we can see people are on the move a lot more. We still have a good 10 days until the 5th of May, and I think people really, challenging and horrendous though it is for some people, keep our heads down and get through this period of time, because if we get to the 5th of May and there's any slight increase in that transmission rate between now and then this will just go on for longer, and there'll be no choice for that. So I just implore and plead that everybody just keeps doing what they're doing. Yes, we can prepare and get ready and make all the plans in the world for what might be coming after the 5th of May, but we need to do that under the restrictions and with no exceptions.
As well, Jennifer, on terms of the jockeys and mental health, the PFAI have kind of suggested that it is affecting some players. And if you were a jockey that went into the lockdown period sort of struggling for winners and, in bad form and sort of trying to put things right, this obviously rendered all that obsolete. And is that something you're conscious of, that, jockeys' well-being could take a little bit of a hit?
Yeah, no question. I mean, we've spoken at length on this show and in general about the challenges that jockeys face. And there's nothing more challenging for anybody in life than uncertainty. And we are absolutely in the throes of the most uncertain times that we've known in terms of when racing will go back, how it will go back, as well as all of the other, the financial implications. There's certainly people who obviously have lost loved ones, who have people who are unwell at this time, who are, have all kinds of challenges, even just if you're at home trying to homeschool your kids or trying to look after an elderly relative. So, take aside the racing aspect of it or the aspect of a sports person and just get through life at the moment can be incredibly difficult. And then you add in the pressures that they're facing and the uncertainty of coming back. So I know you had Ciara Lostry on last week and she continues to do fabulous work with the jockeys, and we try to reach out as best we can at this time remotely, but to try and offer as much support as we can.
And the only other thing is obviously the advice is that if you've got anything else wrong with you, make sure you ring your doctor, make sure you are still continuing to treat all the medical issues that you might have, irrespective of the fact that COVID-19 is out there.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, and probably something that we're going to see pushed and encouraged more, because there's no doubt that people have stayed away from hospitals. A little bit of a joke yesterday was one of the ED registrars that they're seeing all of these guys up the ladders trying to paint their roofs and fix their spouting, and that's what's coming into the emergency departments. But there's no doubt that they're seeing much fewer of the strokes and much fewer of the heart attacks. Certainly people who have symptoms out there that may be indicative of something, you need to at the very least pick up the phone and speak to your GP about that. And there are systems in the hospitals where urgent cases like that will still be dealt with, and probably increasingly more over the next few weeks. We'll hopefully see a return to the outpatient and return to the other non-COVID healthcare. But I think people need to be careful, because the collateral damage from the emphasis, which is rightly needed to be on COVID, could be quite significant whenever things return to normal and people end up, kind of going back to their doctor and saying, well, I've had this for X number of weeks. So your GP is still there, and most of our racecourse doctors are all general practitioners, and they're working extremely hard in really challenging times to try and protect their patients, but they will still be there for you on the phone. And the emergency departments are still there. Most departments are divided into two, so you've got potential or suspected COVID cases and non-COVID. So if you have a condition that you are concerned about or something that needs dealt with, you really need to continue to seek that help.
Your job, as you said at the very start, is unbelievably varied. I mean, obviously nobody expected a global pandemic to hit when it did, but notwithstanding that, how have you actually found the role? Is it something that you've enjoyed from the start?
Yeah, I think, I've said this a lot to people. If you can, I'm doing my hobby as my job, essentially. Like I've been going racing primarily in point-to-points since whatever age we were able to go, along with my family at home, and continued right through that. And, to get involved in the sport that you love at this level, it's kind of a privilege for me that I get to do and get to fight hard and look after a group of people that I have huge admiration and respect for, and to work with the other people in the racing industry, again, that we all have that common interest and that common love for the sport, which is what's really important in this, and it doesn't make it seem like work.
Well, that's the best way to be. And look, you've been great with your time today. Thanks a million for joining us. Keep up the good work on the front line. That is obviously, as I said, the reason that we've all dressed up. Obviously, Johnny wins this particular section of it.
Wouldn't have been much of a contest now, but thanks for the kind of underhand compliment there, Ger.
Well, I'm about to give you another one. You did a great week last week, Johnny. Another winner. The Total Irish Inter Jockeys Fund is now over £1,000. It might be the first time we've made it over £1,000.
This gag is getting old now.
With another, well, sometimes the simple art of repetition is actually the comedy itself.
Do you know what the strange thing is, though? Like, so when did we go into lockdown? How long were we in? The last Irish race meeting was a month ago or so, maybe.
Yeah.
So I've had one bet in the whole month, like, because there's nothing been on. I had one bet in America, and it just goes completely. You just completely forget about having a bet in the horses. So I hope people have forgotten about the bad run that we were on.
I'm sure they have. I won't remind them again. But we had another €100 weekly donation, courtesy of the Tote. This weekend's international racing highlights include 3 Group 1 races in Hong Kong on Sunday, 3 Group 3s from Rose Hill in Australia on Saturday morning, and the Unbridled Stakes from Gulfstream Park on Saturday night. You can bet on and live stream them all on thetote.com. Remember to follow the hashtag #EveryRacingMoment. My thanks to both of you for being part of the show this week, and a quick reminder as well. So Dr. Jennifer Pugh and Johnny Ward with us this week. We'll be back next Friday at exactly the same time at 3 o'clock on all of our social channels on offtheball.com and on the radio on Off the Ball from 7 to 9 every Friday night. We'll see you next week. Best of luck.
Friday Night Racing
on Off the Ball.
Brought to you by Horse Racing Ireland. Love every racing moment. Visit hri.ie.